Good evening and welcome to Overtime here on WOTM. I am Gerhard Mathangani, joined by Mark Everett Kelly. Good to see you again. Monday was a holiday, so we didn't get a chance to catch up. How have you been last week?
Yeah, I mean, I miss it when we don't get a chance to talk sports normally. That's a hard day, you know? It's good to get back into the flow of things.
Exactly. But since then, you and I have been on a show together over with your buddies in New York, the Loudmouths, and good shout out here. Good time to shout out our buddies Errol and Speedy for having us on last week. That was a lot of fun, and obviously getting to know the sports radio audience in the New York area was a lot of fun. It's the audience you know very well.
Yeah, it's getting to see you up in New York. I love you. You're part of the crowd.
Exactly.
Gerhard.
Yeah, it was
fit right in, babe.
It was a lot of fun. Worldwide Sports Radio Network. If you want to check them out, they do a great show there. The Loudmouths. So we have a lot to talk about in the world today of sports today. Lots of developments, especially in the world of basketball, both in the NBA and in college basketball. We have a great Who's Better segment, something that you cook up every week. Our installment this week talks about Auburn quarterbacks. We also have some predictions about where Alabama baseball and softball will be at the end of the week and also at the end of our program tonight. But first, we will start in the world of college basketball. The big news today out is Coach Mike Krzyzewski, the Duke head coach, announcing that next year will be his last. 2022 will be his final season as the basketball head coach. First off, your initial thoughts. I mean, he's obviously been the face of this program for as long as most people can think of and can remember, and he's now at a point now where he's going to call it a career after next year. What were your initial thoughts when this news came down?
You know, I never got to meet Coach K. He was someone I always wanted to meet, and I knew a lot of people that obviously worked with him and knew him very well. Right. One of the guys I knew really well, that was good friends with him, is an AP writer by the name of Jim O'Connell, and he had followed Krzyzewski when they were on the Dream Team because he got a chance to write for and cover that event back in 1992. And he was already close to Krzyzewski because he had covered college basketball since 1979. Right. Actually, he was a Hall of Fame writer. He passed away a couple years ago, so sad because I really miss him. But what a great example he gave me of Coach K working with his players and some of the situations he would put the players through. And these are, bona fide superstars that would come to Coach K for advice. Obviously off the court because he was successful in just about everything he tried. Right. But for, he said getting to watch him and Jordan because Jordan's asking him the best way to catch the ball and pivot while his back's toward the basket, or how to come off a screen, like specific things that him and Coach K would work on. Like you would get like a sixth grader to work on after practice. So those types of things I thought were real interesting. His attention to detail always as a coach was something you appreciated as a fan. And what was Duke before he got there?
Exactly. And that was the biggest thing. They were nothing. I mean, this is a program legitimately built by one individual and turned into one of the powerhouses of college basketball.
I mean, you think of, they had 2 final appearances before he got there. I think they had 4 25-win seasons. Right. He's had 27 seasons of 25 or more wins. Yeah. That is absolutely insane.
And also, I mean, one of the things that I think kind of colors his career in a little bit of a different light is the fact that he was able to not only recruit 15, 16, 17-year-olds to come play at Duke, but also he was the head coach, as you said, of that Olympic team. And that is not just NBA players. That's the NBA stars. That's the best of the best of those teams, especially that Redeem team. The parts that I remember is how Kobe Bryant talked about him and how LeBron James talked about him. These guys didn't play for him in college. They went straight from high school to the NBA, but he was still able to relate in a basketball world with those kind of players. I thought that touch to me was a little bit more special. There's some guys that could just do it with pros. There's some guys that could just do it with the collegiate athletes. He was able to go across the board, recruiting them from the high school level and then, coaching pros.
Yeah, and also 2 different teams. Yes. We're talking the Dream Team, first Dream Team. These were guys that were, hardcore NBA guys. And there was a genuine respect that they had for coaches that were of that generation. And we're talking Hubie Brown and PJ Carlissimo and just a bunch of guys, lifers, essentially, that came up through the NBA. And Krzyzewski was pretty much part of that, even though he never coached in the NBA. So the players had a different respect for those guys, where you would think the Redeem team, now obviously respect is earned everywhere from what they've accomplished. And by that time, Coach K was, a bona fide champion. But you saw immediately when he came into the room, you could look at it like, you know what, it's the Olympics. There was some kind of negative feedback about if players really wanted to be there. But once there was a sense of we're embarrassing ourselves, they didn't hesitate to go to Coach K. And one thing I'll never forget, one time when I was interviewing Dick Vitale, and we were running through scenarios, and I said, if you had to start a franchise, who would be the guy, in pro or college, who would be the guy that you would hire? He goes, Mark, without a shadow of a doubt, I would go down to North Carolina and hire Coach Krzyzewski to run my organization, no questions asked. And I think that says a lot too. Now, people think, they call it Dookie V because they think he's like a total homer, but Dick knows basketball, and he knows guys that know the game. He's an absolute lifer, Dick. So if he says that to me, and he also said Magic Johnson would be the guy that he would choose #1 overall. So I thought that was interesting too. But if he says that about Coach K, with all the coaches, General Montgomery Knight and all those guys, it says something about Coach K.
Exactly. John Shire is the guy that's been tapped to replace him. He's been on the staff for a long time, a former Duke player, played for Coach Krzyzewski. They always say it's hard to follow a legend, and I feel like even this legend is hard to follow. You could talk about it even in the light of like a Gene Stallings following a Bear Bryant. It was obviously a few years afterwards, and then you have a Nick Saban. The shadow's already long at the University of Alabama. The shadow was long with John Wooden at UCLA. I feel like the shadow here is immensely long, not only because of the national championships and whatnot, but also because, like you talked about earlier, this program wasn't anything before him. What kind of expectations do you have for Shire to be able to keep this program going, and do you think that he can keep Duke as Duke basketball as what we've known for the last 30 years?
Well, look, there's an interesting thing here, because if you remember what North Carolina was when Dean Smith left. First you had Bill Guthridge come in, and it was pretty much just as per usual with him. The players knew him. He knew all the recruiting and everything, and he was a guy that had earned a certain amount of respect. He was a little bit older. Then you have the Matt Dohertys come in, and the program starts to dip a little bit, and then they got to go back to Roy Williams to bring that back. Okay, you don't want to see Duke get there. With Shire, you would think he's been there for a while, and once you get to a certain point, just like Alabama, you still have a couple years after. Now, I don't know about when after Saban leaves, because I think we're just going to be mass suicide when Saban leaves, because unless the guy from Clemson comes back to his home.
Dabo,
but
and honestly, Dabo's kind of doing a lot what Krzyzewski's doing.
It's true, absolutely.
It's kind of a parallel there.
Yeah. So, but I think when you set something like that up, you have a couple of years after that of recruiting where maybe you don't have to fight as hard because of what you earned before on reputation, because Duke itself is one of the schools that you think of as a powerhouse. So they have a recruiting advantage already over, say, NC State. Now, nothing against NC State or Virginia, even though they're ACC schools and they've won national championships, there's a little bit different because of, number one, the education you're going to get there, which is one of the top-notch educations in the United States. And it's just an absolute beautiful campus. Out of North Carolina, it's two of the most beautiful campuses on the East Coast. So there are advantages to things recruiting there that I think that he might have the advantage for the first couple of years, but then you got to do just like everything else. You can't run on Coach K's reputation. You got to go out and get the guys, prove that you can be a seller, going against some guys that are really good at this. So, if he couldn't recruit, he wouldn't be in a position to get the job.
Precisely, and I think they want to keep that image. They want to keep that Coach K image, and I think Shire's kind of a good person that will help keep that image there for Coach K. Also, I think it's going to be really interesting as basketball kind of moves into a new phase with the name, image, and likeness kind of now being over the sport. He'll actually be kind of coaching a different sport than Coach K coached when he was the head coach at Duke. But speaking of being the head coach at Duke, here's some accomplishments that you were able to break down. The first season there back in the 1980s. If you were born after 1980, then you're in a position where you've only known Coach Krzyzewski, and that highlights some of the many accomplishments, obviously highlighted by those 5 national championships and 12 Final Fours. And I think one of the greatest things is the consistency in success. One of the things that Saban always talks about. Took a look at of those 36 seasons, 9 games or fewer that they've lost in 32 of them.
Imagine that. I mean, but also 15 ACC tournament championships.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty good conference.
Oh, no doubt.
We had talked the year he came in, Ralph Sampson wound up winning Player of the Year.
Right.
Ralph Sampson in college was one of the greatest college basketball players ever.
Exactly.
So that Jordan, Worthy, Sam Perkins, Len Bias, these aren't nobody's coming out of that conference.
Exactly. So you see the decorated statistics there for Coach Mike Krzyzewski as he heads into his last year. He said he really doesn't want the whole kind of victory lap or whatnot.
Come on.
But the thing is, he's going to get it anyway. So this year is going to be really fun. And I kind of hope that Duke is able to cross paths with an Alabama, and Auburn, and a UAB, or whoever in the tournament. That way some teams from this area can go out and see him in his last year. Coach Mike Krzyzewski coaching one more year at Duke. And that is the top story from the college basketball world today. We also have some NBA stories that we'll get in just a little bit later on in our show. But coming up next here on Overtime, we'll head over to the Diamond, where the Atlanta Braves started to make a splash towards the beginning of the month, or towards the beginning of last month. But this month, kind of getting off to a rocky start. We'll talk Atlanta Braves baseball next.